All right, let's get started. Hey everybody, I'm Brad. I rehearsed this a couple of times last night, and I can't tell if this is a 20-minute presentation or like 2 hours. So all I know is that I encourage you to interrupt at any time with any questions, comments, helpful hints, personal insults, or strong disagreements for me as they come to mind. So if we don't get through every last slide, then we'll have like a hallway track for the rest of it, I suppose. So I'll start off and say sorry. That's my favorite thing to do. This may be less of a presentation and more of a free-for-all. Thankfully, all the slides and sample code will be available to review afterward. And one of the reasons is I've got this pile here. Over the last month and a half, instead of writing the presentation, I've made small bad paintings for you. So we don't have a lot of people, so I can kind of just like pass it around. I'm going to be leaving kind of early in the afternoon, so if you just wait to throw it out until after I've left. You're physically closest, so you could, what I think is probably the most themed one. And we can all go through the pile and not focus on the presentation. And these will all be backgrounds as we're going through. So anything that doesn't get picked up, since I'm not lugging them back to Michigan, will probably end up on the swag table. So I encourage you to let others here take them. As I talk, I might use pronouns like I or we, and I'm just using shorthand there. There exists like this hypothetical me who works on an engineering team at a large corporation, but that's merely a thought experiment to better explain potential uses for queuing scripts. Any resemblance to any person, real or fictional, is purely coincidental. Today, I want to talk about queues. While we could talk about queues outside of Drupal if there's time at the end, since queuing theory and all the other topics are kind of like counterintuitive fun, the talk itself is about doing lots of stuff in Drupal in small chunks. Drupal contains multitudes, so the first thing to cover is what kinds of things might we want to do and what options do we have for doing them. Clearly, this isn't a comprehensive list of things that you might want to do on a Drupal website, but it covers like a lot of the content authory, site builder type things that you might do on a daily basis. And there's a solid chance when you're doing these that you're creating or loading an entity and then messing with it and then saving it. So I guess that's what I'm saying. And then there's a whole bunch of ways to accomplish all the things on that list. So I'm going to be driving home how there's a lot of overlap between these different ways. And one fun thing I want to point out, and it's why it's number one on the list, is folks, especially programmers, tend to discount manually performing repetitive operations since it feels inefficient. However, you can get started on doing manual content entry like immediately, and scripting can often take longer than just clicking and pasting for certain ops. So when you factor in the comparative pay scales and the ability to have a non-programmer do brute force content work, it can easily be quicker and more cost-effective to do stuff manually. But that mental math goes out the window when you have a toolbox for scripting updates quickly. So aren't you glad that you're in this session? Before we move forward, since a lot of us here have day jobs and we're trying to get things done, if you're stuck with anything and you felt drawn to this session because you might be able to solve a problem with a queue worker, I'd be able to helpfully tell you whether that's the case. And the worst case scenario is you'll get a helpful no. So does anybody have a fun work problem that they'd like to share? I'll do like one, maybe two, if there's anybody out there. Yeah, go ahead.
We have to migrate content from one paragraph type to another.
Okay, that's great. Yes, there's a solid chance that can be accomplished with the queue worker, and it might be the appropriate tool for the job. There are other tools, and we'll be going through a number of them shortly. I'm so glad that you said that. That's such a good example. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, I'm energized now. All right. So, it's not easy to make a firm decision about darn near anything, and enterprise architecture and engineering decisions are no exception. So some of those things that you wanted to do have clear answers the majority of the time. So if you want to change config, you want to use core config management, usually supplemented with like some contrib modules like config split or config ignore. and then some overrides in your settings.php files. But if you want to know more about that, you should leave immediately and go to room 325 for Rick Hawkins' session. So content decisions aren't as easy. They depend on how complex and mature your site is, how much content you need to create or update, the risk level, how many people on your team are working on those solutions, if the changes have to be done once or repeatedly, and if the changes are fixed or conditionally and dynamic, etc. So before I show you anything about what the heck a queue and a queue worker looks like, let's set the criteria for when we should use queues or something else. And to make this decision framework quote unquote fun, let's play a game called Should We Queue It? We'll do it too many times, and I'm demanding your participation. All right, so you have a custom module, and you use it on multiple sites, and you want the same configs, which you've exported as YAML and copied into the module's config optional directory, to overwrite any existing configs for the module when you deploy it to various environments. Should we queue it?
No.
All right, this is a smart audience. Okay. Tweak and config is relatively quick and easy, and post-update hooks are great. And yeah, use the helper module if you can for those sorts of things, because in a post-update hook, that just works, just gangbusters. Okay. Let's say your organization's compliance officer wants to keep track of all the articles on your site that have passed a compliance inspection. So you add a checkbox field to the article content type to manage that value, and you set the default value for new articles to unchecked. But all the existing articles have already been inspected and passed, so they should all be checked. Should we queue it?
Yes.
Wow, y'all. Okay. Nah, why would you do that? You're right. If some really powerful contrib modules that are using queues and batches under the hood didn't already exist, this would be a great use case for a custom queue worker. But since like Vue's bulk edit includes a way to set field values for lots of entities to a particular value via the admin UI without any code, it'd be a waste of time, energy, and risk to do it with a custom thing. But you can if it's fun for you. I don't want to wreck your good time.
I would use Drush HPC CLI for this.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, it sounds like you could use a direct SQL query if it's just checking a box.
There's a lot of things you could do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was imagining you had like thousands and thousands of things that you wanted to change that field on.
Sure.
So.
Well, yeah, and my answer here is kind of cheating because it is a queue worker effectively. It's just wrapped and uses the UI. So yes, no, maybe. Those are many of the answers that we'll see for these. We're very shortly through all of this. So you have an existing site and it uses Layout Builder and a design system's worth of block components to lay out and display content. And the site already has hundreds of pages, but now there's going to be 55 more. The front-end developer has already taken a crack at the mocks and confirms that all the various iterations of components are available in the Layout Builder block drawer to accomplish the designs with the provided copy. Should we queue it? You guys are too smart. Too smart. Yeah, this kind of content authoring is like, it's historically a manual task that a human would do. Yeah, like AI tools are close to, if not fully able to perform these sorts of previously human-only tasks, though there can be costs and additional prep associated with that approach. So one heuristic of sorts that I want to discuss with this example is the rule of 100. If you have a repetitive content task, 100 is a good rough guess at when it starts to make sense to think about automating it. So if it's 100 little tasks, chances are you still want to do it manually. If it's 100 complex or conditional ones, then it'll be faster with automation, with the caveat there that work smarter, not harder applies. So you can turn complex tasks into simpler ones, and then that calculation goes all haywire. So you could use entity clone or section library, or just set the default layout in manage display for your Layout Builder enabled content type to be like really close to what those pages would look like, and that could really cut down on the amount of time that you would spend on any individual page building that stuff out. All right, so you have a taxonomy vocabulary, and it's set up with the name and description and a couple other fields, and a stakeholder sends you a spreadsheet with all the categories that they want added to the site. So adding one term manually takes about 1 minute, factoring in navigating back to that add term screen and then sighing heavily. So copy and pasting by hand would be error prone and would take like over 2 full working days to complete. So we can kind of like nix that. So before we determine if a queue worker would be good, let's just take that out of the running. Should we queue it?
Say yes in this one.
Okay.
Yes.
We got no's, we got yeses. Okay, can I get a hands up for yes?
I'll say yes.
And the no's? All right, the yeses have it. And they're right, so yeah. Believe it or not, the Toolbox sample module provided for the session includes this exact use case. In practice, a Drupal site with a decent amount of system resources could create more than 1,000 taxonomy terms inside of a single timeout, depending on how long that timeout is set for. But who wants to risk it with like a post update or a plain cron hook? So let's use a queue worker. This task could also be accomplished with like feeds or maybe an AI assistant if you were in some of the sessions yesterday. But using a queue worker, especially when starting from the working example, and I love copy pasta. It lets you as a PHP developer ensure the data integrity and do weird stuff to strings if you have to and that kind of stuff. And one note here is if you're making a brand new site rather than adding terms to an existing site, then you're probably already doing migrations and it wouldn't make sense to do a queue worker just for that. You'd probably want to write a core migration YAML to accomplish this. So it's kind of, yeah, don't fight upstream on those sorts of things. And that's a recurring theme. I try to avoid core migrate when I can, and then when we have a brand new site, it's a whole different story. Similarly, hypothetically, your SEO consultant wants to update all the content on your site with distinct values for meta tags like title and description and the news tags and the open graph stuff and everything. So at the beginning of this engagement, they requested a spreadsheet containing the current values for all of the pages. So you can make like a serialized view and export that as a CSV or something. And then the quickest and most affordable way for the consultant then to deliver the end product is to just give you the updated spreadsheet. So given the updated sheet, how do you update the existing content on your live site? Should we queue it? Yes. All right, that's good. So this is another one where there's a sample. It's just the C and the U in the CRUD operation, so it's not that distinct from what we had before. But you could technically get migrator feeds to do this too, but you'd have to be careful with updates because you need to make sure that the ID, in this case it would be a node ID most likely, is like the key that's being used to prevent duplicate content. And also you want to avoid overwriting fields that aren't in the purview of what's in the spreadsheet. And those two can be a little bit fraught depending on which tool you're using, whereas with a queue worker, you're in control and writing code. Okay, so this one sounds kind of familiar from the rocket ship slide. So your engineering team is extending the article content type to cover both blog posts and press releases with a drop-down to choose the article type. Press releases have an extra new field that the blog posts don't need. Now that the field configs have been deployed live and the articles that should be press releases have the drop-down set, how do we copy the first 260 characters from the body field into the new field? Should we queue it?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Once again, we've got sample code, so absolutely can do it that way. What makes this an interesting case for a queue worker is that the new field is dependent on the value from another field, so there's like a conditional logic associated with it that might otherwise be difficult to do with like a GUI-based tool like views bulk edit from earlier. And it's only part of the value of another field, so you'd be able to use tokens and views bulk edit together. You'd start to run into limitations of what tokens will do for you. So you could try doing it with contrib, but a queue worker would probably be more reliable. Okay. You've had a site using Layout Builder for years now. And for the first couple of years, you had a block for your hero header rather than a section. Over time, you and your team have revised the content model so that components that contain things are sections, and the content in those sections are blocks. You've rolled out the new section for making heroes that replaces the old hero block for any new pages, but what you'd really like to do is deprecate and remove that old hero block from the good old days, but it's still widely in use on the site. Manually converting all of the blocks into sections would take a content specialist a month or more. So how on earth do we convert a block to a section? Should we queue it? I'm going to need at least one yes or a no.
No, maybe.
Yes.
Those are the
All three.
options. This is the firmest yes I'm going to give you today. If you have a site that uses Layout Builder, the sample in the repo is going to save you a ton of time. It's worth the price of admission for this session. A queue worker is ideal for looping through your site, checking for the blocker section that you're looking for in Layout Builder, and doing weird stuff to it. It's so good at that. It's why I'm doing this talk. In recent memory, our team, the hypothetical one from my fake workplace, has done the following and more. Converted one block type in Layout Builder to another, converted one section type in Layout Builder to another, converted a block to a section in Layout Builder, but we haven't converted a section to a block in Layout Builder yet. But it's definitely possible, and with the code in the toolbox, you have a huge lead in doing that sort of thing if you needed to. It would be similar with paragraphs. We're talking about entities, we're talking about all that. So, a quick aside here is, I think the reason that Layout Builder is such a good use case is because the sections and blocks are defined in like this like big serialized chunk that gets built out into a large data object. And so like with other entities, you'd be able to perform an entity query and like really get to it. With Layout Builder, there's usually like this extra step, and that's why the queue worker helps a lot. All right, we only got 3 more of these. Somebody finally clued you in that Drupal 7 is really close to its end of life. So you're starting to upgrade to the latest version of Drupal so that you can neglect that site for a few more years. And your Drupal 7 site has lots of content across a bunch of types, plenty of fields, custom code, all the things that you'd expect from a Drupal 7 site. Should we queue it? Yeah, no, why would you do that? So we'll touch on core migrate again and what doesn't quite excite me about it, but if you're doing a full-fledged migration, and especially doing it as an engineering team, it's tough to deny that it's the right tool for the job. So you can work some queue workers into a new site with migrations, but as much as possible, you'd probably be happiest sticking to a single approach, especially as a team. So while I'd love to recommend queue workers as like an all-purpose hammer that a knowledgeable PHP developer can use to be productive in doing migrations, it's not the case for every circumstance. A more modest migration from a system other than Drupal 7 might be better served with a queue worker or feeds or something along those lines, but especially Drupal 7 migration, it's core migrate for sure. Okay, so you host 2 sites, and they have basically the same content model, the schema and everything like that. The first site has some really good stuff, so like the privacy policy page and terms of use and about us and a bunch of boilerplate pages. And each of those is pretty distinct in terms of layout and content. So the entity clone trick I mentioned from a few slides back, it wouldn't save you much time if you were copy and pasting it manually. Should we queue it?
No.
I'm seeing the no's, I'm seeing some no's. Yep, it's great. You're too smart, you're outfoxing me. I recommend the default content module here. If you haven't used it before, there's a little bit of setup where you have to get the UUID from whichever entity that you're trying to do. I recommend using views, it's the easiest way usually. You copy all those UUIDs into a YAML list in the .info.yaml file of a custom module that you're making. You do a little drush magic, and then you'd copy and paste that entire module into the other site. And that site has to have default content as well, but then you can import really easily and then turn off all the stuff that you had just turned on to make it happen. And it works a wonder. It kind of feels magical, but that seems like that's the right tool for the job. And I don't really know what you would do with a queue worker to make that happen. I feel like you'd be rewriting default content. All right, the last one. Thank you for your patience. This won't pay off in any way. The author information on your articles has first name, last name, and job title, all as separate text fields. Anywhere you wish to describe or to display that author, though, you want to concatenate the fields and display them as only one line of text. Should we queue it?
No.
You guys are great. I don't even know why you're here. Jeez. It would be redundant, and it could introduce caching and other issues to make a combined field and populate it with a queue worker, and then kind of supplement that with entity cycle hooks, so that it would keep that up to date afterwards. Sometimes the best answer is to keep it simple. So while I ordinarily consider rendering individual fields in a twig template an anti-pattern, that would be preferable to a combined field. In this particular case, I'd probably go with field group and inline styles, but like a pseudo field is a lot of fun to write, so it depends on how ambitious I was feeling that day. So here's the concept of the decision tree here. So what did we learn from that long exercise? First, that I insist on including call and response participation in all of my slide decks. But second, that there's like this decision tree for using queue workers, and it's if you're good with PHP, if you're worried about timeout limits, and if there's complications beyond like a direct mapping of column to field. So those are strong hints that a queue worker is one of the appropriate tools in the box. Similarly, if you have like a short scripted item, a post-update hook is the quickest. If you're making a new site with a content migration, core migrate plus migrate tools and migrate plus is likely the best choice. If you're bringing in a third-party API or uploading spreadsheets frequently, I'd take a look at feeds. There's a new recent stable version, I believe. Correct me if you know better. If you're updating content in a very simple way, views bulk edit goes a long way. And if you have multiple sites on the same code base and entity schema, then default content can save you a lot of time with boilerplate pages. So we're decent ways into the talk, and we've only talked at a very high level about what we can use the queue worker concept for. Since nobody here wants to see like a tiny VS Code window, I'm going to show and tell a few select snippets and then point you to a GitHub repo if and when you want to dig deeper. So in between the code snippets, I'll give a few tips based on showstopper bugs that the hypothetical Brad released into production. Quick thing with the painting. I found something at the Salvation Army. There's a painting that much better violin girl, but on the back I put all of my banana stickers. So I thought I'd just put them on the front for the little bad one I made. Anyway, so there are two main pieces of queuing in Drupal when you get down to it. The first is you populate the queue, and you do that with like brief information that you can do quickly. And that's the information that you need to process each item. And often it's like the entity type and the ID for an individual piece of content. But sometimes it's like a row from a spreadsheet that's been interpolated into an associative array. But no matter what the item is, the idea is filling up the queue should be the quick part. And then each individual run of a queue item can be much more intensive. So with that populated queue, and for each item in your queue worker, it uses the brief information to do more intensive work. Often this means loading an entity, doing a bunch of processing and memory consuming work, and then saving that entity. So for the first step of populating the queue, a drush command is a great way to do it. So this is the top 2/3 of a drush command to populate a queue from a CSV file that you commit into the custom module. It wouldn't be terrible to use like file URIs instead and then rely on Drupal file management, but this is quick and easy. And if your team has to like review a PR to get the entire process out, having the source data right there in the module can help. And in GitHub, if you upload a CSV, it'll show it in like a table, and it's like kind of nice. So I had fun relatively recently converting annotations into attributes here. they've been around a while, but that was like the first foray that I really had into it, and I kind of like it. PHP Stan and PHP Code Sniffer might yell at you if you wildcard your use statement, so you may find it best to bring in each attribute, like command, usage, option, all those individually in the use section at the top of your file. So the rest of this method loops through the rows variable. It's down there. Loops through the rows variable and calls create item on the queue that we make right here. And then when the loop ends, it prints out to the console and says we've queued up 1,000 items. And so this is the second main type of a drush command in the sample module, and it's a kind of run-of-the-mill entity query. So the entity type is a required argument that's passed into the drush command, while the bundle is an optional flag. So you could queue up every node on your site very easily, or you could narrow it down to just events or something. And that happens quickly and reliably in that many lines of code. And one thing you'll see in the sample module that I recommend is keep all your drush commands in one drush commands class file, and then each queue worker in its own queue worker inheriting class. I've seen like a Franken class that combines the drush command and the queue worker, and that works if you know that you're only going to have one. But once you go to make your second one, all of a sudden you're going to want to factor that back out to individual files. And then, you know, shared code in a trait and all the other good code hygiene stuff. So there's an actual part of a queue worker. I don't know why we waited that long. The important method in a class implementing queue worker base is process item. And it takes the data that you populated into the queue during the drush command or the other way, any other way that you would populate the queue, and it's an argument called data. And behind the scenes, Drupal handles whether process item completes and succeeds, or if it reaches some sort of failure state, and it will handle that sort of like QE stuff for you, for the most part. So this top part just shows preparations for loading an entity. So we're getting the entity type manager storage for the entity type, which is passed from the data. And this comes in handy, and we'll see in a slide. So what we're about to look at is the continuation of that last code snippet. And the important part is that you should load the latest revision ID early, process the current revision first, then load, process, and save the latest revision afterward, and make sure that the timestamp is later than the current revision. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of angry people telling you that content moderation is broken on the site, and then you cry a little bit. So sorry for the small text on this one. This is doing exactly what I just described, but there's a couple of extra things if you're eagle-eyed here. So we call a prepare revision method, and what it's doing is it's writing out a revision log message, which is passed in there, and it's the time. So you can see here it's time plus 1, and up here it's just time. So this is the current revision, this is the latest revision. And then while you could put all the operations in that process item method, you can break it out, and it's really useful when you're doing this boilerplate, because like this update entity is running for the current and the latest, and otherwise you'd be violating don't repeat yourself there. All right, so one kind of homework assignment I had before before this talk was like take a look at core and see what it's doing with queues. There's 3 main queue workers that you'll find there: translating locales, downloading thumbnails for media, and deleting defunct staging directories. And in contrast, the batch API is used a lot more often, though batch is using queuing under the hood. So what about batching? Isn't the batch API great? Doesn't it show like an animated progress bar? Yeah, it's great. It's in core. You've seen it when installing, when doing lots of stuff. But if you go and read the inc files, there are 2 things I kind of want to point out why I kind of just stick to plain old queues. The first is that the very first block comment in batch.inc reminds you that like this is largely related to forms, and that a lot of the logic for it is in form.inc. And so if you're not building a form, then it's probably wasted effort. If you don't need a front-end UI or an admin UI, then you're kind of wasting your time. And the second is I'm talking about inc files. And so this is, it tends to be a lot more procedural, a lot more function forward, whereas queues are in the newer object-oriented style. So I still have love in my heart for Drupal 7, but I can't really justify it. So I'm by no means saying that you shouldn't use the batch API for what it's intended for, or that you're doomed to write like everything in OOP forever. But like queues alone can get you pretty far. So yeah, if we combine them with drush commands, you can get a lot of stuff done. This is the nerdy slide. I'm going to say the words. If anybody wants to ask about it, go right ahead. Otherwise, let's just pretend it didn't happen. So there's nothing inherently wrong with tracking down the interface surface for the QWorker-based class's constructor and then tacking on arguments in your custom modules services.yaml file. It can absolutely work, and it would make the class itself more succinct. And I didn't run a profiler, but I think that it might also be more performant. But in terms of productivity, I like to be able to like do like Command Alt down and make a new line inside of that return static for the create method and be like, okay, what's the name of that service that I need? And then boom, it's all working. I'm staying in a single file. I'm still using dependency injection and getting what I need from the container, but it's just so much easier and more convenient. And I don't lose any sleep because there's plenty of places that are using the container factory plugin interface to do that. So I mean, productivity is important, and unless you're really worried about performance, then chances are you're going to save more time just going that way. Anybody have color commentary on that? Okay, cool. So this is where I talk bad about migrations, core migrate. So there have been some queue workers in recent memory that the hypothetical Brad wrote that another developer would have accomplished with core migrate, and with core migrate and plus and tools like I mentioned, you can accomplish a lot of stuff. But when you first start down that path, you think it'll be like feeds if you used that back in the 7 days or in its newest iteration, where you're clicking, you're choosing this is the source field, this is the destination field, and if I have to do something a little bit funky, then I'll use feeds tamper to do it. But it ends up being a lot of YAML, and you're writing it by hand, and it's just weird. So I've been on a bunch of different teams, working on like prominent library websites, government sites, at a bunch of different levels, and other teams, and a lot of different migration use cases over the years. And I mean, that's the reality. Is like you're writing code by hand, and it's weird to write logic in YAML. So because I've been doing PHP for like a couple of decades, so it's just kind of feels like a step backward. And I get why it's set up that way, and it makes sense at scale, and there's the potential to add a UI there to make that a smoother process, but in practice it's just a slow down to me. So that's why I've reached for queue workers more recently, and why I decided to come up here and badmouth migrate. So a couple of more selling points for the sample module that will be linked in the next slide, or that you can click on the Midcamp page immediately. If you just needed to get the term ID by the name of the term, tiny little helper method, you can also find that on Stack Overflow, but mine's pretty nice. An example of path matcher, if you've ever tried to replicate what like a core block does to match up all the paths that you do for show on or hide on certain pages, it's like pretty deep in there. So it's helpful just to have that there for you. And then yeah, if you needed to get a node or a node ID by its path alias, also a helper method for that. And yeah, as I mentioned, the driving force here, it has to do with dealing with layout builder and converting stuff. So the key trick that's shown in there is there's a to array that you can run on a section object, and it turns it into an array, and then you can do whatever the heck you want with it and then convert it back into an object when you're done. And that's that might be the only way that you can accomplish stuff in Layout Builder if you're just writing weird custom modules. So yeah, encourage you to go there. It's just sitting around. It's got a single commit. The bugs are all intentional. No warranty, all of that. And then a contrib note, it wouldn't be very community focused otherwise. If you need a queue UI or advanced queue features, and advanced queue I think is tied a lot to commerce. If you're using commerce, then chances are that you have that as a dependency. If you need those, go check them out. Those are active links in the slide deck to the D.O pages. You got yours. So yeah, that link's there. It contains the link to the repo. It's got the slides for review later. Please don't reach out to me ever about anything. Thank you. Do we have any questions to roll with? Please go ahead.
So, I don't, this may be a little too open-ended and might not be of interest to the room, but one of my dissatisfactions with the queuing system, when you compare it to something like, Ruby and Sidekick or Django and Celery and that sort of thing, is like those have this fully realized, a machine queue you can put n number of workers onto and you can scale the workers out.
Sure.
I would love to see something with Drupal that worked a little more fluidly like that. I mean, it's like, I know that I could spin up a bunch of Docker containers that are all running drush queue run or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's cumbersome.
Yes.
And, especially if you're like trying to scale out, periodically I could have 10,000 things that I want to chunk through, and if that queue is 1,000, I want 1 worker. If it's 10,000, I want 5. That sort of scaling is not easy to work with. I was wondering, is that something you've worked with, have any nudges on?
I haven't personally worked on that, but Matt Glaman's here.
Who is?
Matt Glaman. I know that at some point, and maybe I'm causing him more trouble than it's worth, or lying to you. I believe that at some point he's either done a talk or written something along the lines of concurrency when it comes to queues. So he would be a good resource, and he happens to be here. Otherwise, yeah, the advanced queue has a couple of additional nice to haves. So you could have different queue types, and I don't know if concurrency or that sort of thing's in there, but it's like if you wanted to set different priorities for things, or reorder where in the queue different things are going, that all becomes more possible with those contrib modules. But yeah, to your point, besides throwing metal at the problem, I don't really know that there's anything good on the Drupal side. At least I haven't dealt with.
It seems like there are a couple of other major frameworks that have treated this just like a core consideration. That, I don't know, and part of the question is like maybe other folks in this room have a similar, I don't know. I don't know how to poll the community for interest in that. Like,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well,
thank you.
anybody else interested? Yes, please go ahead.
One thing, so I'm using queues on a side project to send, this is more of a compliment thing, but I'm using queues on a side project to send, it's like it's emails and text messages, and it can send hundreds of thousands, so queues is very helpful for that. One nice thing is, it seems like queue, when you have a queue worker, it also is a cron job. So you can schedule your queues to run with cron very easily. And using different like cron tools like simple cron and things like that, you can set it so only your queues run on certain schedules. So like I said, I have my emails and text to go out every 5 minutes, for example. So if I have 1,000 of them queued up, it's like a batch will go out every 5 minutes and then wait 5 minutes and wait 5 minutes and wait. That seems to work very well. One question I have related to that is, it's been working well, but in the back of my mind, I'm always worried, like, okay, if something goes wrong, like say the site crashes or something, what's the state of my queue?
Sure.
Is it stored somewhere in the database? Is it stored in state? Like,
Mm.
and then, brought the site back up, like, where would the queue, what would the state of the queue be?
Yes. So you've made two very good points. I'm going to address them both. So you can do a lot more with queues than just using a drush command to populate it and then do weird stuff in a custom module. So to your point, sending out stuff or doing recurring operations, and that can be triggered by things other than a drush command very easily. And rather than running the queue directly via drush in the CLI, you could do it on cron or with some other triggering event. So that's clearly not covered here, but it's a point well taken for sure that the system is used for lots of stuff.
If the queue is going to really work, so like there could be a way to trigger it other than with drush, like maybe with a curl request or something.
For sure.
With an external balance or something.
The second answer is a lot more straightforward. It's in your database. People can get really annoyed with how full the queue table can get. So queue UI from the contrib module is very useful to make sure that you don't have 200 megabytes of queue items that are just stacking there. So. Anything else? If not, then I'll point you towards tomorrow for contribution day. Don't be like me. Actually stay in town and contribute. And thank you very much. Have a great day.